Hi everyone, my name is Chandra and I'm a rising junior at Rutgers University. I'm a pre-med student and a biological sciences major. My interest for medicine sparked in 7th grade biology when I started learning about different systems and processes in the human body. I learned about the digestive system, the circulatory system, the respiratory system, you name it. And I just really enjoyed visualizing each step in those processes occur inside my own body. And that's when I fell in love with science, more specifically the human body. And I'll explain more about this later on in this presentation, but because of my experience with sort of volunteering, shadowing, that sort of clinical experience, I started to love the idea of medicine and how medicine kind of encompasses the idea of not only helping people, but also applying your knowledge of the human body to diagnose the patient and give them a treatment plan along the way and helping them along the way. I'd like to thank Design Your Careers for giving me the platform and the opportunity to reach out to other pre-med students, high schoolers, aspiring doctors, and guiding them in elements of their resume or application that could better set them apart from other students. Because of my interest, I want to help high schoolers and pre-med students currently in college with sort of trying to figure out things they can do to better help their application for medical school or undergrad. And this is kind of an overview of what I'll be going over. So I'll be touching upon academics, extracurricular activities, leadership positions, clinical experiences you can get involved in, research experience, and I'll also briefly go into 7-year medical programs, and I'll explain the different types there are later on. The first thing I'll be talking about is academics. This might be a little obvious, but it's important to get good grades. As pre-med students and people wanting to go to medical school, it's pretty competitive. I mean, there's so many students who will be applying to medical schools within your class year. And in order to sort of distinguish yourself from other people, one of the main things on your application will be your grades, what type of classes you're taking, whether you're academically challenging yourself, and medical schools want to see that you're able to handle the rigor of all these pre-med classes and balancing these with other extracurricular activities or leadership positions you may have. While it is good to have good grades, and you should try to get good grades when necessary, a couple of B's or maybe a C won't hurt your chances. Medical schools won't reject you if you get a B, for example, in a writing class, or a B in a science class. I know many upperclassmen personally who have had a B or 2 in science classes, and they still got into medical school. Another thing I'd like to talk about is the SAT if you're in high school, or the MCAT if you're in college right now. For high schoolers, the SAT, it's good to get as high of a score as possible because, again, it is a standardized test that kind of distinguishes you from other students taking that standardized test. But in high school, it's sort of easy to compensate maybe if you get a lower score with other extracurricular activities you could be doing. For college students, the MCAT is an entrance exam where you kind of do need to get as high of a score as possible. And another point I'd like to talk about is that it's important to show improvement over the years. Let's say you might not have gotten good grades in the beginning. Don't get discouraged. You never know what's going to happen, right? So if you do get not so good grades in the beginning, as long as you show medical schools that you improve with each semester or each year, they can see that you're definitely putting in the effort, that you're definitely committed to going into the medical field, and that you're willing to work hard to do so. So that sort of rigor, that sort of determination is what medical schools like to see, because even as doctors, you're supposed to be doing whatever's best for their patient. even if it means kind of staying up, trying to figure out what's best for the patient. That sort of level of commitment is very important. That being said, I emphasize that good grades are important and that maybe a couple of B's or a couple of bad grades won't impact your chances, and it really won't. But another thing I'd like to add is that academics aren't the only factor in your med school acceptance. Like I mentioned before, I will be going over different things or activities you can do that can help enhance your application, such as extracurricular activities or leadership positions, and I'll be going into that now. Now I'll be talking about extracurricular activities. These don't necessarily have to be healthcare-related activities. That's a common misconception, actually, among pre-med students and high school students. The students feel the need to immerse themselves completely and solely to medical science or healthcare kind of activities. But that's not true. In fact, whether it be admission into undergrad or admission into medical school, they want to see you as a well-rounded person. If you only limit yourself to joining clubs or activities that involve this sort of science, that's not really showing what other interests you have. It's highly encouraged to do extracurricular activities in things you're very interested in, such as dancing, sports, art, or any other fun activity. One thing with extracurricular activities is that it's important to show commitment. If you start a new activity, maybe in high school, in college, wherever that may be, try to continue with that activity for a couple of months or a year even, or maybe even more. Because by showing that sort of commitment, that shows the admissions committee that you're willing to learn something new, or that you're willing to stay committed and are willing to maintain that same determination to be a part of that given activity. And even as doctors, when you're meeting a patient, you do need to give it your all. Do your best. Stay committed to the patient. Make sure that they're happy, that they have all their questions answered. So, as I mentioned, but even in the academic section, a lot of what you may do, whether it be extracurricular activities, your academics, it can give medical schools a sense of the type of doctor you might be. And some of the activities I like doing is that I Bollywood dance, and I also play piano, actually. So I like doing a lot of artsy things behind, but I do a lot of leadership positions as well as clinical experiences, which I'll be going over. Now I'll be going over leadership and having different leadership positions. Having leadership positions show medical school that you take initiative in what you're doing, and it also shows them that you have confidence in a given task. These positions don't necessarily have to be independent from the extracurricular activities you may do. For instance, if you're a dancer, or if you play piano, even teaching other students how to dance or how to play piano, that is a leadership position. So you can kind of make it however you want depending on what you're doing at the moment. Work experience can also be a leadership position depending on how you describe it. In medical school interviews, maybe if they ask you to describe more about yourself, you can touch upon these experiences and talk about how that certain position helped you develop as a person. For instance, maybe it helped you step out of your comfort zone, or maybe it helped you learn how to communicate more with people of all ages, stuff like that. And even as a doctor, having this sort of leadership is important because you need to have this big sense of confidence and commitment to what you're diagnosing a patient with, helping them with, and treating them. Some leadership positions I've included here. It's just a small list, but one of them is being a peer mentor for incoming first-year students. So in high school or in college, there may be programs like this where an upperclassman can sort of guide an incoming first year or underclassman in their transition to college, giving them advice on what classes they could take if you're a similar major, and just helping them adapt to the lifestyle of college, because going in, it can be a little difficult, a little intimidating, and it's good to have a friend who is experienced. Another position I have is being a peer leader for students in my residence hall. Now, it may sound a little similar to peer mentor, but it's actually different, and I actually mentioned this on my current resume. So as a peer leader, I basically make events or plan events for everyone else in my residence hall to sort of create this sense of community. I'm also on the peer mentor programming board, so I help plan events for the peer mentor mentee program. I also serve as a tutor, and I'm also an editor for the Pre-Health Magazine Club at Rutgers. So that's not to say that you have to do all of these things. What matters is how you convey your experience from these positions. I only briefly touched upon my roles in each position, but if someone were to ask me, I'd give a more detailed response. Leadership, it doesn't have to necessarily be the things I mentioned, but another thing I'd like to add is that you shouldn't only get leadership just for your resume booster or for medical school. These are rewarding experiences that help build your character, help you gain confidence, and help you develop as a person, make you become a better person. So I would highly encourage you to get leadership positions wherever you can. And don't be afraid to contact someone or ask someone if you see an opportunity arise, because you never know, they might say, yeah, sure, here you go, take this position. So never be afraid, and I'll be going over that also later on. Clinical experience. I'd like to start off by saying that it's never too early to start. In fact, the earlier you start, the better, because it can help you understand whether going into the medical field or being a doctor is what you want. I mentioned before that my interest and love for science started in 7th grade, but it really wasn't until I engaged myself in these sort of clinical experiences that I realized that I wanted to be a doctor. A love for science doesn't necessarily mean that you want to be a doctor. It could mean that maybe you just like learning the information and maybe you want to teach it to other students, be a teacher, or maybe you want to pursue some sort of research. So one of the main things with clinical experience is that it gives you affirmation that you really do want to be a doctor. Another thing I'd like to add is that you should be able to talk about your experiences during these clinical hours. It's not necessarily that the more hours or more experiences you have, the better. It's rather the quality of those experiences. Make note of what you learn from each experience, your emotions, how you feel, how those experiences can help make you a better person, those sort of things. Because it's good to know that for yourself, but should the admissions committee ask you during an interview, it's also important to sort of explain that to them. Because many pre-med students get involved in clinical experiences. If you only talk about the number of hours you do, how are you going to differentiate yourself from other people? It's the unique taste, the unique experience you have yourself that will differentiate you from other students. So I listed some examples of clinical experiences that this is not a full list, it's just some I thought of off the top of my head, but many of you might have heard volunteering at a hospital. Depending on the hospital, there are applications. The one I applied to, I started volunteering sophomore year of high school, and there was an application process that started, I believe, over the summer, and then I had to undergo an interview, a group interview process, and then only was I able to start. But again, it depends on which hospital you're trying to apply to. I also did shadowing, and shadowing is another clinical experience. So a good way to get shadowing actually is to maybe if you have a connection like a family friend, you can just ask them if you can shadow them for a couple of hours. But another good way is something called a cold email. What this basically means is that you send out an email to a doctor or someone you don't necessarily know. But in that email, you would have to clearly state your interest in shadowing that person. So you could say like, "Hi, my name is so-and-so. I am interested in pursuing a career in medicine, and I would love to shadow you to get to know more about the lifestyle of being a doctor." Something like that. Even as doctors or people well advanced in the field, they're definitely willing to help the younger generation, the aspiring doctors, because they were in our place at one point in time. Going back to clinical experiences, another thing is EMT. So EMT, also known as emergency medical technician, are basically the people in the ambulances that respond to a scene when someone calls for 911. So you get trained for, you take a course maybe over the summer, which is what I did, or you could take it during the school year as well, depending on the other commitments you have. But you take a course for a certain number of hours. There's exams in the class, and then you also have a practical section where you practice CPR and other skills should those scenarios occur in real life. And I can say I think that's one of my favorite clinical experiences, because not only am I getting that patient interaction, but I'm also able to help treat them, help make a difference in their life as I transport them to the hospital to a higher level of care. And something I didn't do but is also a clinical experience is a medical scribe. Medical scribes are basically people who help the doctor with taking notes as the doctor discusses treatment options with the patient. And I've actually applied to a couple, it just didn't work out with my schedule, but I think that's also a great experience if you want to understand different medical terminology and be involved with the treatment process itself, because you do need to understand what the doctor is saying, what the patient is saying in order to type those specific notes. And there will be training for that, so don't worry. Some companies I can think of off the top of my head for being a medical scribe is Scribe America and ProScribe. And there is an application process, but if you look it up on Google, I'm sure you can find more information about that. So yeah, things I've done hospital volunteering, EMT, and I've also shadowed an endocrinologist. Now I'll be talking about research experience. Research is not necessarily required to get into medical school. It's honestly based on your interest. If you're not interested whatsoever in research, you don't have to do it. But if you are, great. If you're hesitant at first as to whether you like research or not, I would recommend testing the waters a bit. See if it's something you would like to pursue maybe even in the future. However, I'd like to add that research, while it isn't required, and if you don't do it, it's not like you're going to get rejected or anything, but it shows medical school that you're interested in sort of the technicality and understanding things at a microscopic level, depending on what lab you're in. I started doing research the beginning of my sophomore year, and I'm planning on continuing that until I graduate, finally. So how you can get a research opportunity. One is with the cold email, and I briefly mentioned this in the clinical experience section before. And just to recap, a cold email is basically when you email someone you don't necessarily know, expressing your interest for something. In this case, you would be expressing your interest in being a part of this research lab. When writing these emails, I would definitely recommend looking onto the researcher's lab website, reading about different projects going on, maybe even reading a few abstracts of some papers they maybe published. because by sort of reading that, picking a few sentences maybe, and expressing that you're interested in doing so and so and would like to learn more about it by joining this lab, it gives them the impression that you're definitely willing to be a part of their lab, stay committed, and do research for them. Because not only will it help you if you're a very curious person, but it would also help them because they'll have little helpers in the lab assisting them on a variety of projects. Another way you could get this research opportunity, I mentioned meeting them in person, but typically in my experience and according to what upperclassmen have told me, most people get it through emails. Some schools actually do offer specific programs for getting into research. At Rutgers specifically, there are two that I am aware of. One is called the Arrestee Summer Program, where it's only offered for first-year students the summer after their first year. And it's kind of an intensive 2-month program where students have the opportunity to immerse themselves in a specific lab, and at the end they'd be able to present their final lab results in a sort of presentation setting. There's also another program at Rutgers where people have the opportunity to do research for a certain number of credits. And this is at Rutgers, but I'm definitely sure at other undergraduate schools there are similar programs to this. If you're in high school, definitely reach out. Don't hesitate to reach out. There's no hard written rule that you need to be a college student in order to do research. However, in my experience as a high schooler, I wasn't able to get research, maybe because I didn't email enough people. But don't be discouraged. It doesn't hurt to try. I know one person who actually got a research opportunity from high school itself. So definitely the cold emails do work. So far, I have covered different aspects of your resume or application that can help you with your acceptance into medical school. Now I'll be talking about or touching upon 7-year medical programs. Many of you might be familiar with these, or maybe you're not, but these are basically programs where you have early or conditional acceptance into medical school. How these 7-year programs typically work is that you'll have 3 years of undergrad along with 4 years of medical school. So you would graduate undergrad a year early or finish it a year early before what you usually would do. Within the 7-year med program categories, there's 2 different types. One is applying to a 7-year med program right out of high school, and the other one is offered to students at a particular university. For the 7-year programs right out of high school, those are typically more competitive only because there will be many students, many people wanting to get into these programs, competing amongst each other. And there's only a limited number of spots they might accept. Maybe they'll only accept 10 or 15 students. I've personally applied to 7-year med programs when I was a senior in high school, and I didn't get into them because perhaps the other students had better academics than me or better extracurriculars than I did at the time. The other type is that these programs are offered to students at a particular university. For instance, at Rutgers University, Rutgers offers 2 different types of 7-year med programs for sophomore students. So basically what the process is you apply the end of sophomore year into either one of these programs, and then there will be an interview process, and then they'll notify you of your acceptance or if you didn't get in. With the interview, to my understanding, there are 2 different types of interviews. One is a traditional interview where they kind of ask you, like, tell me about yourself or tell me about your experiences. But there's also another type called the MMI interview, which is a multiple mini interview. And the MMI is basically, it's scenario based. So instead of those typical questions, the interviewer will be giving you a specific scenario, whether it be some sort of an ethical scenario or something pertaining to science, the medical field, and you would have to give your take on that. Because of the competitiveness of these programs, students often find it difficult to prepare for these type of interviews, or they just don't know how they compare to other students. But if it's something you're looking for, if you want to save a year, then definitely look out for these sort of programs. When I was applying, I know on Google I actually saw a pretty big list. Many websites gave us like a list of different 7-year programs you could be applying to. But although it is competitive, it doesn't hurt to throw in an application here and there, because you never know, maybe you'll be one of the 10 students selected. I hope this workshop was helpful and you guys got a feel for what medical schools or other pre-med students might be doing to build their resume and get all these experiences. So I'd like to thank you for listening to this workshop, and I wish you all the best of luck in whatever you're doing. Again, don't be afraid at all to apply to different programs or request someone to shadow them or request someone for an opportunity, because at the end of the day, you don't know what's going to happen, and if it works out in your favor, that'll benefit you in the long run. So I wish you the best of luck, and I hope you all succeed in your future careers as doctors.
Thank you for watching. For details, visit www.designyourcareers.org or send an email to info@designyourcareers.org. Subscribe to our channel, Design Your Careers, and hit the bell icon so you'll never miss a video.